Welcome back, second grade scholars. Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, 2020. I'm so excited for today because it's our very last unit of the school year in math, and it is geometry, which is something that you studied a lot in kindergarten and probably reviewed in first grade. But geometry in second grade is where we're going to be talking about 2D shapes, and we're going to be talking about their properties and their attributes, which would be like the way to describe them. And we're also going to introduce you briefly to some 3D shapes, okay? So some of this might seem familiar to you, especially this first lesson. I know that we practiced some shape review in our math review since going to distance learning, and also inside the school when we've been together. But our job here today for your problem solving task says sorting shapes means you put shapes into groups based on what they have in common. As I'm going over sorting really quickly and reminding you about this in case you're confused, please make sure you grab something to write with and something to write on. In kindergarten, you did an entire math unit where you were sorting different objects. Sometimes you put different objects in groups by color, by size, or by what they were. So I know that you could sort buttons by colors or by the number of holes in a button. You could sort different shapes by what shape they are. You could sort different objects by the color of them. So many different ways that you can sort. Remember, sorting just means you're putting them into groups because of something that they have in common or something that's similar. So Mr. Gilbert had a job. And it says that Mr. Gilbert sorted these shapes into 3 groups. So you have the shapes in here, here, and here. Take a look at those shapes. Think if you can name these shapes. Think about what these shapes might have in common, or what these shapes might have in common, or even these shapes. Your job right now, and this is your problem solving task, is to figure out how Mr. Gilbert sorted these shapes. So in other words, what is the rule that the shapes in each group follow? So all of these shapes have what in common? All of these shapes have what in common? And all of these shapes have what in common? On your scrap paper that you have in front of you, I want you to write down what all of the shapes in group 1 have in common, in group 2, and in group 3. Go ahead and pause the video and get started on that. Awesome. Hopefully you've had a chance to go over these. We're going to jump right into it. Now, I know that group 1 makes you think that you have to start here with group 1, but you don't necessarily. When I looked at these, my eyes immediately went to group 3 because I could tell that all 3 of these objects were triangles. And I know they're triangles because they have 3 sides and they have 3 vertices or corners. That's my daughter in the background. So I know that Mr. Gilbert sorted these by the fact that they're all triangles. And I think that for me, I'm going to write a couple of things down until I can actually think about the other groups, okay? And I'm just going to make some notes here. So I think these are triangles, and I'm going to write in here 3 sides, 3 vertices. Okay. Now here, group 2, that's where my eyes went next. I can see that I have 3 shapes. They're not all the same shape, but these 3 shapes are a little bit different from one another, but what they have in common is that they are all quadrilaterals. And I know that they're quadrilaterals. Kenzie, please stop. I know that they're all quadrilaterals because they have 4 sides. So the more information that I'm getting as I look at one group at a time is that it looks like sides is something that all of these shapes have in common. He did something about sides, some sorting with sides. So when I think about sides and I look here in group number 1, I see a hexagon, I see an octagon, and I see a pentagon. And while these shapes don't have much in common because they're 3 different shapes, the one thing that I'm noticing is that all 3 of these shapes have more than 4 sides. So in group 2, all of these shapes have 4 sides. In group 1, all of these shapes have more than 4 sides. So now I'm going to go back to my triangles, and I'm thinking that the rule that Mr. Gilbert followed had something to do with the number of sides, and 3 sides is less than 4 sides. So I'm going to write that on the lines, even though I just made my notes on the chart. So the rule for shapes number 1 is that they had to have more than 4 sides, and that's why Mr. Gilbert put a hexagon, octagon, and a pentagon. And group number 2, they have to have only 4 sides. So I could put a rectangle in that group because a rectangle has 4 sides. And the last group has to have less than 4 sides. So Mr. Gilbert sorted these shapes by the number of sides. That's one way you can sort. You could even sort by the number of vertices. You could even sort, if these were different colors, by color. But he sorted them this way. So we're going to practice together today sorting different shapes. Like I said, this is a little bit of a review from what you did in kindergarten with sorting, but it's also a little bit of review from giving us a little bit of a review of our 2D shapes before we jump into some trickier topics. So this first question up here is presenting us with 2 groups of shapes, and we're going to go over this together. So when I look at these groups of shapes, I'm noticing something that all of these shapes have in common. Before I'm even reading the questions, I'm noticing what these have in common. And for me, I'm noticing that a lot of the sides here, they're not straight lines, but instead, they don't really even have sides, but they have curved lines. You can see the curved lines in all 4 of these shapes. So I'm going to write that down here. Now, if these shapes have curved lines, let's take a look at the lines over here in group 2. Are these shapes curved lines? No. These are straight lines. So I think whoever sorted these 2 shapes, they did so by the type of line. Curved lines over here and straight lines in group 2. So it's asking me what is the rule for shapes in group 1? Well, they all have to have curved lines. And the shapes in group number 2, they all have to have straight lines. So it's important to think about what all of the shapes in a group have in common in order to figure out how someone sorted them. This next problem, I'm going to have you pause the video to go over by yourself. So take a look at the shapes that you have in here. The question says, which rule could be used to divide these shapes into 2 groups? So these are the shapes that you're given, and you have to think about which one of these choices, A, B, C, or D, would make sense, and you could use to divide these shapes into 2 groups. Pause the video and go ahead and get started. Awesome. Hopefully you've had a chance to solve this problem. This is a little bit tricky. When you guys were solving it, I was taking a look at it, and it definitely is a little bit tricky, but let's go over it together. So the way that I like to solve a multiple choice problem is go through each of the answers. When I see here, I notice that some of these shapes have curved lines and straight lines. Some of them have 4 sides. Some of them have more than 4 sides. But let's go over and see what the first rule is. The first rule here says group 1, shapes with line segments. That might have been a word, a phrase that you didn't know what it meant. Line segments are lines that do not connect. Are there any lines here that do not connect? No. So you can already tell without even finishing it that this one wouldn't make sense. So I'm going to get rid of that. Group option B. Group 1 would be rectangles, and then group 2 would be shapes with curves. Awesome. Do we have any rectangles here? Absolutely. This is a rectangle and this is a rectangle. So that would fit into the first group. But the other group says shapes with curves. So this has a shape. This is a shape with a curve, and this is too. But does this have a curve? Is this a rectangle? It's not a rectangle. And this does not have any sides that are curved. And the same thing here. This is not a rectangle, but it doesn't have curved sides. So because not all of the shapes would fit into those two categories, that means B is not right either. C, group 1, rhombuses, and group 2 would be shapes with curves. So we already know we have 2 shapes with curves, which means that all 4 of these would need to be a rhombus. A rhombus, you might call it a diamond or a kite. That's actually not the word that we want you to use, but if to get you the visual, that's kind of what we're talking about. But a rhombus is a quadrilateral, which means it has 4 sides. Are all of the shapes left over? Do they all have 4 sides? No. This shape right here is actually a hexagon. It has 6 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that one wouldn't make sense either. And D. We're thinking this is right, but let's go over it. And we're thinking it's right because it's the last option that we have. Group 1, shapes with equal sides. Do you have any shapes with equal sides here? No. And 2, round shapes. I have 2 round shapes, but I have 4 shapes that wouldn't fit into either of those categories. So guess what, guys? D is also wrong. I know, thinking back to what we just did in together for a discussion problem, if I was coming up with my own rules, I would say group 1 could be curved lines. Oops. Curved. Okay, I don't know what I was writing there. Curved lines. So that would be a shape like this and this, putting a 1 inside of them. And then group 2 would be straight lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and I should label them with the number 2 since they're a part of group 2. So in a problem like this, it's so important, as you can see, to go through all 4 choices, because guess what? All 4 choices were wrong. There was not a correct answer here. So right now you're going to switch and you're going to go work on your exit ticket that's attached to your Seesaw assignment. And we're going to be asking you to do another sorting activity and to look at some work and think about it. So definitely, if you have any questions about the first day of our geometry unit, please reach out to your teachers. Again, we'll be talking about 2D shapes as well as some 3D shapes over the next 10 days. Awesome. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow with another math video.